Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the 5-Star Zone. I'm your host, Rico Beard. Joining me today, Michigan State beat writer for the Detroit Free Press, the one, the only Chris Solari. Chris, thanks so much for giving up your time, and it's what's about to become a very busy season for you, especially because, look, like myself and a lot of fans, you may follow Michigan State, but you don't really know who's on Michigan State. If there was ever a time to buy programs, it's this year. I think, 62 new people on the team. Chris, what is this team even going to remotely look like?
Well, it'll look like a football team. I think that's one thing that I mean, and I don't want to say this is just a Michigan State thing too, because maybe in 2021 when they did the roster reset and everyone thought, okay, who are these guys that Mel Tucker brought in and where'd all these guys come from? This is now the norm in college football. I mean, that 21 Michigan State team was kind of a harbinger of everything that's happened since. And funny because I asked Pat Fitzgerald that year when they were getting ready to play them, I said, does this something that coaches are going to be watching? And he said, well, coaches are the greatest thieves that if something works, they're going to do it. Well, it worked that year. And I think Jonathan Smith has gone about it in a meticulous way to bring the type of guys in that fit his style of football, his program. Obviously, the three guys he brought in from Oregon State as transfers with Aiden Childs, Tanner Miller, and Jack Velling are three guys that you're going to hear a lot about, and they've played a lot of football for him at Oregon State. So that gives a nice little baseline. But there are a lot of new faces. And when you look at the captains that were announced earlier this week, five of them, four of those guys are transfers in the last 2 years, and three of them have come in this year with Childs, Miller, and Jordan Turner, linebacker from the Detroit area, who was at Wisconsin and came back. Nate Carter came in last year, the running back from UConn, and he's become kind of a staple. And the only guy who's had a full career of experience at MSU is Maverick Hansen.
Who's on his 12th year?
It seems like it. He's on the Kevin Pickleman plan.
Good call.
But that's a throwback there. But and that's the thing, is like college football right now is kind of like that. You kind of need it doesn't matter what you see in the spring, because sometimes half of those guys are gone, and we kind of got a little bit of a gauge of what Jonathan Smith's trying to do in the spring, but that's all rendered moot when guys start hitting the portal and leave the program and new guys come in. So it is going to be an interesting year. I think these first two games in particular listen, Tom Herman's a heck of a coach. And, I don't think you can look at Florida Atlantic from last year and say this is going to be a cakewalk game. Herman knows the Big Ten, and he's going to come in the opener looking to make a statement in his second year at FAU. So then you got to go to Maryland after that. So it's going to be an interesting year. I think those first two games are going to really dictate, maybe not necessarily what this program is going to be about, but at least what the realistic expectations for this season are.
And I guess realistic expectations, let's just go right into that. I was going to ask you that later, but what are the expectations? If you're a Spartan fan, what is something that you could say, yes, this was a good year? Is it 6-6 making a bowl game? Is it just not falling flat on your face and getting kicked in the balls when you play the top 25 teams? What is success for the Spartans this year?
I go back to what Mark D'Antonio said really after his last game at Yankee Stadium in the Pinstripe Bowl. The absolute baseline for this program that he helped establish. I mean, remember, things weren't that great when he took over in 2006 for that 2007 season. But what he did was, in 12 of his 13 years, took MSU to a bowl game. That's the baseline. That's the bare minimum, especially in this era where there are so many bowl games. And I think that's got to be your starting point. And when that's the starting point, then anything above that is success. You know,
Okay, but Chris, here's the thing.
A 6-win season is still success based on what happened last year, what happened the year before that, and really go back to 2020. I mean, there's been one outlier year tired in 21, and college football caught up to what Michigan State was doing with the portal at that point, and now you got to play catch up again. So that's, I think, where Jonathan Smith's success comes from, and you got to stay healthy. I mean, you're not going to. I mean, the health factor, particularly on the lines, I wrote about this today in the Free Press. That's going to dictate what success is, right? I mean, if you start getting injuries on the offensive line, you're only about 6-7 deep right now, and you've got a lot of inexperience, some young guys who've got talent but haven't really played a lot of football. You start getting banged up there, then your idea and concept of what success really is right now, it becomes more of a building block year. I think they got some talent in the trenches, and I think they got some up-and-coming guys that can make an impact. But if you start chipping away at that, you know, when you've already lost a lot of guys to the portal in the trenches, success gets shifted in a hurry of what is realistic.
Well, I mean, to some, success could just be if Jonathan Smith doesn't get caught touching his dingus in a hotel room. That's, you know, and he made it all the way through the season. But I guess what I'm saying is, under Mark D'Antonio, it's a different game. Now you have allegedly, you know, players that are transferred into Michigan State making close to high 6-7 figures. Is it unfair to expect an instant success? Like it used to be patience and development, whereas now it's, well, what the heck are we paying these guys for if they're just going to come in here and lose?
You know, it's funny you say that too, because I think you look at it, and college football fans are always like this. They're looking at a lot of it through a microscope rather than a telescope. You might be paying those guys 6-7 figures, but the schools down the road are paying them 7-8 figures. So there's a sliding scale here, right? And you know, it cost. That's the other thing is the pro game. The cost is based on not just your expectations of what a guy can become, but sometimes, particularly second contracts, what guys have done already. You don't really have that here. I mean, I guess you have it in some respect with guys like Tanner Miller and Jack Velling, who showed that they can play at a high level, but a guy like Aiden Childs is all based on potential and promise.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, it is a weird world. I mean, it's trying to understand what success and immediate success can be when essentially it's a market now, but not a market. It's not a traditional pro sports open market system. It's different.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you should really tie success to that, because ultimately it's going to come down to developing these guys. And I mean, that's going to take time. It takes time for a new staff. But when you're bringing in the number of transfers that they did, I think, I think it was like somewhere around 30 some outbound and maybe 24 inbound. Those are the guys that you want and need to really make an impact. And how much of an impact can that many guys make in a game like this? When you need 22 guys plus the depth behind them, that's going to be a challenge. And then when you've lost the guys to the portal that they have, and I think that listen, one thing that Mel Tucker did was he rebuilt some of the talent base. Unfortunately, the way the era is, a lot of that talent base has split it off to Oklahoma and Alabama.
But see, here's the thing, though, Chris, when you say he rebuilt the talent base, because when I see kids going into the portal, a lot of guys are always looking at, well, who did we get? Who do we get? I like to look at, okay, where did the players leave go? Did they get better or did they go a step below? Like, you look at all the quarterbacks that left Michigan State. Only one got a starting job someplace else. The others are backups. Like, you look at the different people who leave. Right. And which is telling you, like, wow, was the talent actually there? Because if you can't go to a Coastal Carolina, you can't go to a East Carolina, then maybe you weren't Big Ten ready, and maybe you did not have a fully stocked Big Ten team.
Well, at the quarterback position. I'm talking about the other positions. I mean, you've got the offensive linemen who went to bigger schools.
Right. I mean, you got Spencer Brown who went to Oklahoma, but from what the Oklahoma people telling me,
you had Vandermark going to Alabama too.
Yeah.
And Kalen DeBoer, I've known Kalen DeBoer for 20 years. He is a heck of a football coach, and that was a great hire at Alabama. And in fact, I had told some people at Michigan State early in the year after they were facing Washington last year, I said, this is after the Tucker situation. I said, it's a guy you should probably look at, but they probably wouldn't have had him because his star was way on the ascent at that point. But I digress. I mean, you had some other offensive linemen go to major Power 5 schools. You had the defensive linemen with Harmon and Barrow going to major Power 5 schools. There was talent in the trenches, and that was where that staff was trying to build out from, right? They were trying to build the offensive line and defensive line to the level that Michigan State was at in the late 2000s, early 2010s. So I think that the talent was there on that side. The quarterback talent, you're right. I mean, and some of the skill talent that you saw, you had Mangum transferring over to Michigan,
right?
So I mean,
he's not even going to start there,
right? But there was talented players that did leave the program, and they brought guys in who've had experience. Now, we'll see if a Jordan Turner, when more snaps are coming his way, if he can rise to the occasion. But Miller and Velling have played a lot of football at the Pac-12 level, at an all Pac-12 level high. I mean, they were at that kind of elite level in the Pac-12 as players. Childs, 91 snaps, man. I mean, 91 snaps, and he's 18 years old. There's a lot to learn for a kid like that. So, talent versus expectations and experience level. I mean, I think you have to kind of understand there's going to be a learning curve for a kid that's 18, moving halfway across the country, moving into a new conference, but still having the same staff who knows his skill set and knows how to put him in a good position to be successful, but he's still got to get the reps. And, that's also what makes it hard to maybe gauge a baseline of what success means for this team, because Aiden Childs is so young and he is so talented, but he also is incredibly green. And again, his success is going to go back to what happens in the trenches.
Well,
right?
It's funny you keep mentioning
the run.
Yeah, because Chris, I look at this and when Michigan State was good, you said it. They had offensive and defensive linemen, and that was the salad day. That's the 2013, 2015. You were sitting at the head of the table. The line hasn't been that good since. You were putting people in the pros, and whether it was the Allen brothers, like you were putting guys in the pros on the offensive line. I think Kenneth Walker was the ultimate deodorant. He made you think that you had offensive linemen, but it was really Kenneth Walker who did all of that as a running back. Bringing over Tanner Miller from Oregon State, how quickly do you think this line, and do they have 5 legitimate starters, or was it going to constantly be rotation, and we'll kind of figure it out as the season goes on?
I think you might see that at a couple of the spots. The Luke Newman kid, Brother Rice kid, who was playing down at Holy Cross. He was a left tackle there, moving inside, transferring up, trying to bolster his stock. I think he's an intriguing prospect, but he's got to prove it at this level. Definitely got the size and skill set to do that. Ashton Lepo and Brandon Baldwin and Stanton Ramil at the tackle spots. Baldwin has had experience, but he hasn't had a lot of success on the edge. Lepo hasn't had as much experience, and Ramil was hurt last year as a true freshman, but he's a 4-star kid who has all the measurables, but again hasn't played a snap of college football.
Right.
So those are your guys you're looking to protect the blind spots and the edge for Childs and to set up Carter and K'Ron Lynch Adams in the run game. I do like the Miller addition in part because last year he worked at guard. He was a starting guard mostly for Oregon State, but he also was their number 2 center. So when their number 2 offense was getting reps, he was already working with Aiden Childs as the number 2 quarterback. That you can't discount that, right? I mean, not just the hand placement, snap, but also the communication that the quarterback and the center need to call out defenses and get the rest of the guys around them adjusted. That there's something to be said about having that familiarity. But again, doing it in the Pac-12 versus doing it in the Big Ten week in, week out is going to be a little bit of a difference. And it's going to be an even bigger adjustment with Childs going from the number 2 to the number 1 job.
So is this, and I'm talking with Chris Solari, MSU beat writer for the Detroit Free Press. Chris, does this season, because people are always asking me, how good can Michigan State be? What's their floor? What's their ceiling? And I say, and I don't know if I'm oversimplifying it, this team will be as good as Aiden Childs. Aiden Childs, if Aiden Childs can get to that air where Kenneth Walker kind of carried the team, then maybe they will win some games that we don't think that they should win. But it really boils down to, is he that playmaking quarterback? Because in college football, Chris, as you know, if you have that guy who has that it factor, you can win games. And now all of a sudden you go from being, perennial underdogs to people are looking at you like, hey, maybe we slept on this team.
Yeah. And it's funny because I asked Maverick Hansen about that. I said, because he was there in that 21 team, I said, can Childs have a similar impact to what Walker did in that season? And, and he brought up some great points. I mean, the difference is that a running back, you get the vision field, right? You're in the back, you get an idea and you can see it, and you're not always going to be the guy. Whereas the quarterback, you're going to have the ball in your hands every play pretty much. I mean, unless there's some sort of trick play, you're getting the snap. So you got a lot more on your plate. So that's a little different in that respect. However, I do think that what I've seen from him, in the limited glimpses that we get in practice, he's got a great delivery. I mean, he's got one of the better deliveries I've seen of a Michigan State quarterback in terms of fluidity and throwing motion, how he places the ball for his receivers, the touch with which he throws it, and the velocity. And that's, you've seen guys come through like Andrew Maxwell, who had all the velocity in the world and maybe the strongest arm of the D'Antonio era, but couldn't get that touchdown, right? And not a touchdown, but the touch that you need in delivering the screen passes or delivering the crossing routes.
Yeah, as we like to say, be able to drop it in the bucket. Yeah.
I mean, he's throwing fastballs 100% of the time. It's great for a closer, not for a quarterback. And when, then you've got guys like Peyton Thorne who had some decent touch, but then didn't have the accuracy at times, didn't have the downfield juice. Childs has a lot of all those components. And again, that's where on paper and in practice and through the scouting that the recruiting services do, you see those things and it pops, and it absolutely pops with him. But how is he going to be when the bullets are live? How is he going to be when you got to make the checks at the line, when you've got to be the one? You're not coming in with just a scripted package. You've got the full playbook now, and you've got audibles. And I will say this: if there's a year where a guy can make that kind of leap to go from potential to displaying that talent, this is a good one for Childs, because now you're not reading cards on the sidelines anymore. You've got the headset, the offensive coordinator in your ear helping you pre-snap, right?
Yeah, Stallions.
Those are things that I think are going to help Aiden Childs and this Michigan State team. So there are a lot of variables that I think that, how good can this team be? Do I think that Childs drives that? Yeah, I do. I mean, I think he's got the potential to be that kind of Kenneth Walker difference maker, especially if the offensive line breaks down and he's got to run. He's got mobility too, not just to move the ball north and south away from pressure, but also to go east and west and give his receivers time to open routes or to develop some things when plays break down.
No, because like I said, to me, everything you just said, Chris, he's got the ability to be that playmaking quarterback that I don't think that really MSU has had. I guess maybe the last one would have been Lewerke, who could just consistently get it done. So, yeah, I look at Childs and I'm like, if he can just, go out there and maybe steal a few games, because the way the schedule sets up, I mean, it's 4 games that they could win or should be in, followed by 4 games against top 25 opponents, which, let's face it, the past few years, that has been the death nail of this program. Like at halftime, the game is over. And then you follow the season up with 4 games that, once again, are winnable games. So that's why I look at it. I'm like, okay, if you just hold true to that pattern, man, if you're able to be that guy, you're looking at an 8-4 type of thing. And I think right now, if you offer Michigan State fans that contract and says 8-4, but you're going to lose those 4 middle games, I think 90% of state fans would say, yeah, I'll take that.
This is one of the great stats, and I had to call this up in the background because I did the digging at the end of last year after the Penn State debacle at Ford Field. So in the games against Michigan, Washington, Ohio State, and Penn State, MSU got outscored 170-10.
Wow.
And they got outgained. Are you ready for this one? 2,306 yards to 693.
Hold on. Say that number. I got to write this down. What was that number again?
2,306 yards for their opponents, all top 10 opponents, and 693 yards for MSU in 4 games against them.
Wow.
And outscored 170-10. So, yeah, I mean, the D'Antonio era, you were keeping the score low. You were keeping those yardage totals low on the defensive side. And remember
in D'Antonio's era, Chris, Michigan State was the team you did not want to see if you were a top 10 team, because they would come into your house and upset you. I remember the Penn State game when they went into Happy Valley and ran the trick play, I think to Felton Davis, and they ended up winning the game. It's like, that's what the Spartans did. And now it's just like, dude.
When you know how they did it, and this is I think going to be the difference between Jay Johnson's offense and what Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren want to do on offense. They did it by controlling the clock. They kept their defense off the field, kept the defense fresh, and grinded out long drives. It's what Jonathan Smith wants to get back to. I mean, he's an offensive guy. He's a former quarterback, but running the ball is a priority for this team. And milking the clock will go along with that. And it's kind of a throwback, right? I mean, most teams are now put up as many points as you can while you can, and doesn't matter how quick. And even in the 21 season, Michigan State had all those quick strikes, right? I mean, how many first play touchdowns did they have? Like 3 in a row at the start of the year, first 3 games.
Yeah, Walker 75 yards to start the year off.
But the defense was a sieve. And so when we talk about Walker masking some of the issues on the offensive line, he also masked a lot of the issues on the defense, that they were giving up huge chunks of yardage. They were giving up time of possession. I mean, the time of possession in the Mel Tucker era probably was, I would say, 65-35 to the opponents, 60-40. And you're not going to win many football games doing that. I don't care what era it is. But that's how D'Antonio did it. He worked the clock. You keep the score low. And I don't necessarily think Jonathan Smith's going to be a low scoring kind of guy, but he wants to run the ball. He wants to get that push up front, whether it be the 2 running backs. I do like Lynch Adams. I think he's going to be a nice complement with Carter. And I think they're going to kind of play off each other. They can come out of the backfield and make some catches. So you got some guys with off the radar a little bit in terms of coming up a level from the mid-major in the FBS, but guys that have some talent. But I also think that, Childs, are you going to need him to run the ball maybe like Lewerke did, or even a Drew Stanton? Maybe not, but that the option is there, and that you have the ability to do that with your quarterback will help those running backs as well. And probably, hopefully for what they want to do, keep the defense off the field and allow them to stay fresh and not have to worry about grinding out 8 10 play drives, 12 play drives that they've got to suck air and try and figure out how to stop a team.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the defense, Chris, because I think lost in everything from last season, the defense really wasn't that bad. Now, I know you gave up that stat, but to me, you had an offense that I think finished the year 109th or something ridiculous, which means basically you were Mr. 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. And as I like to say, if you leave any defense out on the field for 40-plus minutes, they're going to break down. And you saw that. I think Michigan State had at least 3 games last year where they probably should have won, but they ran out of gas. And even the 2 games that they won, geez, I mean, they barely held on.
Plus the cumulative effect of game after game after game of doing that. I mean, those guys already by midseason aren't playing at 100% strength, and now you add in that component of having to play that many more snaps on top of it. I think they were down to a 3-man D tackle rotation.
Yeah, they were. So now you bring
Barrow and Harmon were banged up, and Hansen was banged up. So it's like, even though you had a 3-man rotation, you were playing 3 guys at 70%, maybe.
I think the only good thing that came out of that was we got a glimpse of what Jalen Thompson was going to be and the type of player he was as a true freshman. And you hope that they can add upon that. But now flipping over to the defensive side, what is this going to look like? Did they bolster the defensive line and the linebackers and the secondary with the portal players that they have coming in? Because, you talked about Jordan Turner earlier, but you also have Wayne Matthews coming in from Old Dominion at linebacking spot. Like, did they bring in enough pieces to really help in shutting some teams down? Because the Achilles heel last year was 3rd and long. I mean, 3rd and long, you might as well just spot the other team the first down because they were going to pick it up.
Yeah, I mean, time will tell if they've got enough depth and pieces. I mean, the linebacker room is a lot deeper, and that was clearly a focus. I mean, obviously Darius Snow isn't the same player with the knee, post injury. So you needed to kind of help add a little more depth around Halliday and Jordan Hall, who I think Jordan Hall is going to be a special player and a special leader in this program for a number of years. And now you bring in a guy like Turner from Wisconsin, who's got Big Ten experience there. Matthews is a guy, again, playing up to the highest level now of FBS, has shown the ability to get in and be a disruptive force. But I do think the biggest addition maybe, and in some ways kind of the quietest addition, is bringing Joe Rossi in. There's something to be said about muscle memory of a defensive coordinator already working in the Big Ten, knowing the opponents, scouting them, knowing what works, what doesn't work, and then blending him with a new staff that he isn't maybe not familiar with, but they're an offensive-minded staff, and they needed an experienced defensive guy who understands what Big Ten football culture is. So I think Joe Rossi's defense has shown it can work at Minnesota. And if you can work that defense at Minnesota, you should be able to do it at Michigan State, because as good as PJ Fleck has done there, you've got a different talent pool at Michigan State. There's that pecking order, right? I mean, Michigan, Ohio State, and now Oregon you throw in there, maybe in Iowa, a couple, some of those programs, USC are upper echelon, but Michigan State's always going to be kind of pecking at that door. Minnesota can try and get to the middle sometimes, and every 5-6 years peek their way into that back 5, but Michigan State is a program that should be in that conversation, and not necessarily in the top 4 or 5 every year, but in the conversation to be there. And I think Rossi's defense is going to be a big part of that. I mean, it has nothing to do with him being a Pittsburgh guy, which that's something we've already discussed, but he also knows the Midwest. Some of those guys like Chad Wilt, who played at Wisconsin, is working with the rush ends. He's an Ohio guy. Like, they brought in some guys. You got Courtney Hawkins on the offensive side who knows Michigan. Jonathan Smith, from a strategic standpoint, built his staff. Even though he's got a lot of West Coast guys, he's got some key guys with Midwest ties for the recruiting realm that already have been in those hallways, in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Indiana. The core states that D'Antonio built the program in, right? And especially on the defensive side. everyone talks about Pat Narduzzi, this, that, or the other thing, but they built that defense around guys who were Ohio kids who had that chip on their shoulder that they love to talk about because Ohio State wasn't beating down their door.
Right.
There's something to be said about that. How and why Mel Tucker abandoned Ohio in recruiting as a guy from Cleveland, I still don't know.
Well, I think he would,
like, of all the mysteries of the Mel Tucker era, how and why Mel Tucker took the blueprint that D'Antonio had for success at Michigan State in his home state, right? Mm-hmm. In recruiting his home state, and somehow not. I don't think they had more than maybe 2 guys.
No, Chris, I think the difference was he tried to take the blueprint from the Alabama Georgias, and I'm going to go get national players, and I'm going to make this a national program where, D'Antonio realized MSU is a regional program. And I know to some people that sounds like an insult, but D'Antonio maximized that and said, you know what? He and Izzo, that 5-hour radius, man, I'm going to get anybody within this 5-hour drive where your parents and your family can come and see you. There's pride here. You know about this team. You know about all the rivalries. And yeah, you know what? The Nikos Allens of the world, Ohio State passed you over, son. And you remind him of that every time you play them. They didn't think you were good enough.
Yeah. I mean, how many defensive backs? Xavier Henderson and, you go down the list of guys. I mean, even the defensive backs. I mean, they would get like a Darqueze Dennard from Georgia, but they also had Trey Waynes from the Midwest in Wisconsin. They had all those guys from Michigan over the years that were playing safety, like a Kari Willis, right? I mean, a lot of it was in that Midwest region. I mean, if you overshoot, I mean, listen, sometimes a home run is great, but a double in the gap will do it, right? And some of those second-tier guys in Ohio, even though you might have them a little lower on your board, how much time and energy and effort are you spending chasing the top 10 kids who are going to 5 schools? I mean, like right now, when you look at where every top player is picking, I don't even know how these schools have them scholarships available for them. I know they're going to expand the scholarships,
right?
But man, I'm looking at like 5 or 6 programs in the country that seem to be getting every 4 or 5-star kid right now.
Yeah,
and
but here's the thing.
At some point, the bottom's going to fall out on that. And that's where I think a guy like Jonathan Smith has to establish those relationships. So if that does fall through at one of those schools, that you've got a portal fallback option, but focus on the kids in the Midwest who are on the come up. And he has talked a lot about being a developmental program, because every bit as much of all those things that D'Antonio did with getting some of those second-tier kids in Ohio, he also developed kids who were 3 stars into 4-star college performers, or 4 stars into 5-star college performers. You can't just plug and play. It's not the NFL.
Right. No, you're right, because I look at guys like I've often said in the portal, if Tony Lippett and Jeremy Langford played now, they would be doing that at another school.
They would have been gone after 2 years.
Right.
Jeremy Langford went from running back to defensive back to running back to defensive back. And
remember, he was a wide receiver.
He ends up a 1,000-yard rusher.
Yeah, he was a wide receiver for a little bit.
That's the one.
Around. Yeah, so
Lippett played both ways. I mean, but again, they were keeping the talent engaged and active. They knew the guys had talent, maybe not the opportunity to get to the spot that they ultimately would fit in, or in a case like Lippett, a guy who had such a good skill set that you could put him both ways. That comes from being a good coaching staff that identifies and develops that rather than pigeonholing, right? It's going to be fascinating to watch, because I do think that Jonathan Smith's background as a walk-on and all the things that took to get him not just to be a starter at a Power 5 school when Oregon State was great back in the Pac-10 era, but then to become a coach and go from the lower levels up,
right?
Those FBS bottom feeders or high-end FCS schools to coach his way back to his alma mater. He's taken a path of progression. And it makes you wonder if the Pac-12 doesn't dissolve, is a coach like Jonathan Smith available for Michigan State at that point with everything?
Oh, no. Chris, I've often said that life was all about timing, and I'll give Alan Haller props because he immediately went out there and addressed him, because here's why. And Jonathan Smith may never admit this, but I think talking to people from the West Coast who knew him, his 2 dream jobs opened up weeks after he accepted Michigan State. Yeah. All of a sudden, the Washington job opens up. All of a sudden, the UCLA job opens up. If it were the other way around, I think he would probably be the head coach of the Washington Huskies right now. But MSU jumped in there. Allen addressed it. He went in there, paid him the money, locked him up, brought him in here, and got him to come and leave his comfort zone of Oregon State. Because like you said, he played there. He coached there. Like, he's a West Coast guy, and now he's a new transplant to the Midwest. They addressed that, because had they waited a couple of extra weeks after Kalen DeBoer left, Jonathan Smith would have been the first phone call that Washington was going to make. And then this comes from a guy who covered and knows him. He was like, yeah, you guys got lucky. Now, he keeps telling me, like, it's going to take him some time. He's a different cat. He's not going to open up to you. He's not, he's almost the antithesis of Tucker, where Tucker, he had the swagger. He walked into the room and he owned the room, whereas Jonathan Smith is just kind of laid back and reserved and quiet and
California cool.
Yeah, man, a few words, but he was like, you give him some time and he'll eventually grow, and you'll see something like that. But no, I think what you're saying about the development, it may work, but man, you're going to have to almost expedite things, because even when he started at Oregon State, it's a different game. And I don't think that the fan base and the boosters will just sit around and say, well, we'll give you 3-4 years to get your team in here.
Yeah, and I do think that there's going to be an adjustment in terms of comfort zone. We got a little bit of time to kind of talk with him, away from football, and right after spring, or right after, right before they got on the road heavy in the summer, and I find him to be very succinct in terms of what he says. It's not like he doesn't say a lot, but he says a lot. Right? He doesn't need a lot of words to convey his message, which I think is an effective communicator. And probably, when you've been a college quarterback, you kind of need that. You got a play clock going. You got to get things communicated effectively and go, which I think is good from a football standpoint. But at the same point, I think there's definitely personality there. I think that it's going to take him just time to just get adjusted to what the Midwest is, because it is different. It's not LA. It's not even Oregon, right? There might be some facets of it. Yes, I think there is a good translation between Oregon State and Michigan State in a lot of ways, whether it be pecking order within your state and some of the chip on your shoulder visibility things that come with having a behemoth like Oregon or Michigan right in your backyard, but also knowing that, hey, we're a big boy too. This isn't far-flung state directional school, right? This is a power program. He gets that and understands that. I think as he does get a little more comfortable, I think all the steps and groundwork that he's laid over the last few months, I haven't really seen any or many missteps. I think it's groundwork for the future. Whether it pays off right away or not is, again, like I said, those first 2 games are going to be critical to see that. Can you make this a 2021 type season? Can you make this even a D'Antonio season? Would they win 8 games, 9 games his first year?
No, I think they were. I want to say now that the first year, I don't think they won 9. I think they won like 6 or 7.
But that's coming off the Smith era, that they didn't have the. They had one bowl game. The Smith and Bobby era were struggles after Saban kind of started to raise the bar a little bit. And, I do think that, can they, like I said, get to 6 wins, right? Get yourself a bowl game, get the extra practices. Anything beyond that is going to be a big success.
Oh yeah, it's house money.
It's going to be a success too.
Now, wait. What did you say could be a big success?
6 wins could be considered a success based on where this program has been the last 2 years.
Yeah, and my other thing is, and I know this is probably one of the rare times, but just man, a moral victory. Can you not get curb stomped by Ohio State? Can you just make the game competitive and and not have teams feel sorry for you? I mean, Michigan did not feel sorry for you. They were running up the ball, running up the score. But like Ohio State took their foot off the gas for the last few years and said, hey, look, you're not our enemy. We know you're not that good. We're not going to try to just hammer you and embarrass you. But now
the games were over at halftime.
Yeah. I mean, literally, they could have given you 10 of their players and says, you know what, just go into the Michigan State locker room and let's make the game competitive.
Literally, they could have kept scoring at will and been in the third quarter.
Oh, I still remember the game in Columbus was just that. I mean, people make fun of me on the air. I went with a buddy of mine and we left at halftime. I'm like, there is no point of us leaving. Like, I'm going to introduce you to Cane's Chicken. We're going to eat our feelings, okay? We're just going to move on.
Good choice.
We don't need to see this, okay? Let's go eat our feelings. Talking about Jonathan Smith and how he, kind of drew the line and he's trying to keep the Midwest guys in here. I think one of the biggest things he did, Chris, was keeping Nick Marsh in that recruiting class, and now he's on the team. And I've seen him play at River Rouge, but what are you hearing? Like, what is the impact that wide receiver Nick Marsh is going to have?
Yeah, it's funny because, Smith was asked, who's maybe making plays that you kind of didn't expect. And again, without really saying it very loudly, he kind of slipped in. He said, well, Nick Marsh is making plays, but you've come to expect that. Right? I mean, if you're talking about a freshman in that respect, and that was just a little quick comment that he doesn't even consider him in some ways to be a freshman. Right. He said, if you are expecting Nick Marsh to make those kind of plays, that tells me you've seen him quite a bit.
Right.
And I do think that it seems like him and Aiden Childs have really developed a rapport. So that is going to go a long way. I mean, you got 2 new guys that are playmakers. And listen, there are receivers around him that I think are talented. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if Gates can make that next jump, from potential to talent on the field. Montour Foster, if he can stay healthy, he's got the athletic ability. Remember that catch down, I think it was at Illinois or Indiana, where he kind of shed the defenders. And I mean, he can be a playmaker, but not necessarily the kind of difference makers that I think Nick Marsh can be. That was a big keep. That was a tremendous job by that staff to identify a top recruit there and keep him in the tow. That was, and getting him in early. Now you get him 6 months of advanced coming into this season. Time will tell, but I think that's another good building block to have with Aiden Childs. When you start putting weapons around your quarterback, who's got a lot of talent, particularly receivers who got a lot of talent in this era, things can change in a hurry.
Right. Chris, as we wrap this up, so where's your prediction for this team at the end of the year? What are they looking like record-wise?
Yeah, so I went back and looked. That D'Antonio first-year team did go 7-6, but the next year is when they went 9-4. But this is a different era, right? I mean, you've got guys that have come in with college experience. It feels in a lot of respects like a different program than 12 months ago. In not just the coaching change, but the wholesale sweep of the roster. So you eliminate a lot of the negative thoughts. And I think when you bring in that much new blood, particularly some key guys who've had experience with the coaching staff, I think you can infuse a little bit of optimism and hope that maybe otherwise wouldn't have been there.
Let me help you with this. Give me, instead of nailing you to a number, because, I'm sure all the fans will love to say, oh, you were wrong. What's the floor? What's the ceiling?
I think the floor is going to be based on the injuries. Like I mentioned earlier with the Lions, I think you start getting attrition in the trenches. It could be a 4 or 5 win season. you stay relatively healthy, I think 6 wins is easily attainable for this team. I think that's a good baseline. If all things click and you've got Aiden Childs connecting with Velling and Marsh and the running backs kind of finding some holes and the line starting to grow and develop, 8 wins isn't out of the realm of possibility. It's not going to be easy because you've got this expanded Big Ten. You've got some real behemoths like we talked about that you got to go through, but you take care of business in the games you're supposed to do. That's what D'Antonio did, and I think that's where Jonathan Smith has to focus. You take care of what your must-win games are, and then you have the games that you want to be competitive in and make them a coin flip.
Chris, appreciate your time, man. Chris Solari, he's the Michigan State beat writer for the Detroit Free Press. You can read his stuff all the time online. Chris, thanks for coming on the 5 Star Zone. Appreciate you, man. Anything else you want to add?
I just need to get a drink.
All right.
My sinuses have been killing me on the last couple of days, and I made the mistake of coming and starting talking about Michigan State football and not having a glass of water next to me. So
it's a rookie mistake, man.
Gotta hydrate this time of the year, man.
This is why it's still the preseason, man. I'm expect better for you once the game kicks off on Friday for Michigan State. All right. Thanks a lot, Chris. Keep liking, subscribing, and watching. Tell your friends you've been watching the 5 Star Zone.